Tammy Lynn Leppert is just 18 years old, yet she's already well on her way to becoming a star. She's been working toward this goal since she was a child. She's done hundreds of beauty pageant appearances and dozens of modeling jobs, and her next stop is supposed to be Hollywood. Tammy Lynn has the right connections, the necessary talent, and a supportive circle of friends and family. But there's something else, something that seems to terrify Tammy. At first, she acts restless and withdraws. She starts behaving more and more strangely, becomes paranoid, and has meltdowns. She makes dark hints that someone is after her. And then, in broad daylight, she vanishes without a trace and is never seen again.
And she said, "Mom, what would you say if I told you somebody was trying to kill me?"
It must be an incredible feeling to see yourself on the big screen in a movie. But for 18-year-old Tammy Lynn Leppert, life in the spotlight is nothing new. She was born in February 1965 in the state of Florida. That is exactly where children's beauty pageants in the U.S. first became a commercial phenomenon. As a child, Tammy was practically an instant participant as this beauty pageant culture grew ever larger. She became something of a veteran in this field, winning more than 280 beauty crowns over the course of her career. Her mother, Linda Curtis, worked as a modeling agent herself. I think it's more than fair to assume that she encouraged her daughter to enter the beauty pageants. A family friend later recalled that the family was not in a strong financial position. Her parents had divorced when Tammy was 7 years old, and her mother raised her alone afterward. Accordingly, the prize money from the beauty pageants likely served as an important pillar of support for the family. As a teenager, Tammy landed several modeling jobs thanks to this experience. In 1978, she even landed on the cover of the teen magazine CoverGirl. Tammy Lynn didn't just want to make it as a model, but above all, as an actress, and she certainly showed talent for it. An acquaintance of her mother, Linda, who was a theater actor himself, gave Tammy some coaching. Decades later, he still remembers a time when Tammy recited a monologue from Peter Pan when she was just 12 years old. And even then, it was already clear to him that she could really make it as an actress. In 1980, she landed her first small role in the film Little Darlings, followed by another appearance in Spring Break in 1983. Little Darlings, in particular, wasn't a huge hit and has largely been forgotten today. Spring Break, however, went on to gross a remarkable $25 million at the box office after its release. For Tammy, it's promising to start by building up exactly these kinds of credentials. Adding a few solid films to her portfolio, making the right connections on set, that can help her on her way to a Hollywood career. Of course, everything that happens behind the camera is especially important. Being on good terms with the right people, grabbing coffee or a meal with them, attending the right parties. And just such a party is being thrown for the entire cast of Spring Break to mark the end of filming. Unfortunately, the exact location of the party is unknown. But Tammy's mother has allowed her to go without supervision. Yet something is no longer the same after this party weekend. When Tammy returns home, she's changed, suddenly withdrawn and distant. Her friend Wing Flanagan recalls, "Sometimes I asked her what was on her mind, if something was bothering her. Most of the time she'd change the subject or just say, 'Oh, nothing,' and laugh." If you're thinking now, well, it's understandable that a teenager wouldn't want to confide everything to a male friend. But Wing and Tammy were more like siblings than friends. Wing had moved in with Tammy and her mother Linda at the age of 11 and had grown up with them ever since. Her mother, Linda Curtis, also noticed that Tammy Lynn, who was usually so outgoing, suddenly seemed out of sorts. And one day, she asked her mother a question that would haunt Linda Curtis for the rest of her life. "Mom, what would you say if I told you that someone wants to kill me?" After returning from the party, Tammy holed up at her family's house for a few weeks. But in March 1983, a new film role awaits her, her biggest opportunity yet. Tammy only appears briefly in the film, but anyone who, at the age of 18, has already filmed a scene with Brian De Palma and can claim to have appeared in the classic film Scarface alongside Al Pacino certainly has some promising career prospects. In her scene, Tammy distracts a driver who is actually supposed to be acting as a lookout. The plan was apparently for Tammy to be on set for more than 4 days of filming. Tammy is flexible with her schedule. The shoot is taking place in Miami, and for the duration of the job, she can stay with Walter, a family friend. But after just 4 days of filming on the set of Scarface, Walter's phone rings. It's the film's casting director, calling to tell him that Tammy had suffered a nervous breakdown on set. It apparently involved a scene where someone was supposed to be shot and fake blood was splattering everywhere. And when Tammy watched the scene, she started crying hysterically. Walter then picks her up from the set. When he arrives, Tammy is still in her trailer, pacing back and forth inside the small trailer. She is said to have kept sobbing to herself, "They're going to kill me. I don't know where to hide." After this breakdown, Tammy Lynn heads straight back home. But her anxiety attacks keep getting worse. She wouldn't eat or drink anything, fearing someone might try to poison her. Once, she drew Wing's attention to a van parked on the street in front of the house. The neighbors had just bought it, but Tammy seemed to see a potential threat in the car and thought someone was watching her from inside it. On July 1st, 1983, Tammy's paranoia finally reaches its peak. She leaves her mother's house, but wants to go back in immediately, only to find that the door has locked behind her and she doesn't have a key. But Tammy is apparently so desperate to get back inside that she smashes a floor-to-ceiling window with a baseball bat. When Wing asks her what she's doing to the window, Tammy charges at him with the baseball bat in her hand and becomes physically aggressive toward him. Linda Curtis then pulls the plug and does the only right thing. She takes 18-year-old Tammy Lynn to the nearest doctor to have her mental state checked. She is even hospitalized for 3 days. But the doctors can't explain what's triggering her paranoia and anxiety. Physically, Tammy Lynn is fine. There are no traces of alcohol or other substances in her blood. At one point, she also talks to her mother about the party that was thrown for the spring break cast. However, she only makes cryptic hints. Tammy says she saw something terrible, something she shouldn't have seen, but she refuses to say what she saw. When Tammy's case is later reenacted on TV, there's even a scene where the phone rings at Tammy's house. Before her foster brother Wing can pick up the receiver, she begs him to say she's not home if the caller asks for her. A male voice does indeed ask for Tammy. Wing says she isn't home and hangs up. Whether this is merely a fictionalized element to illustrate Tammy's paranoia, or whether such ominous calls actually took place, is unfortunately unknown. At this point, the party has been over for several months, yet she still seems unsettled. Time and again, Tammy says they're coming to get her. To this day, no one knows who they might be. But one thing is certain. A few days later, Tammy Lynn Leppert will vanish without a trace. On July 6th, Tammy has a date. She's meeting a friend named Keith. Around noon, Tammy leaves the house, and her mother Linda notices that Tammy hasn't combed her hair beforehand. This is completely out of character for her daughter, who is usually so perfectly groomed. Keith will be the last person to see Tammy alive. Keith describes how he picked Tammy up in his car. and the two soon got into an argument on the way. They had actually been on their way to the beach, but because of their argument, they never made it there. As Keith recounts, Tammy told him she wanted to run away from home and asked him to drive her to Fort Lauderdale. When Keith said he wouldn't take Tammy any further than Cocoa Beach, the argument escalated. She then asked him to drop her off at the old Glass Bank building in Cocoa Beach. The building is about a 20-minute drive from her home. Later, surveillance camera footage shows that Tammy was indeed in the nearby parking lot. From this parking lot, Tammy walks to a payphone. From there, she tries to call both her Aunt Ginger at work and a friend named Ron, but is unable to reach either of them. Instead, she leaves several messages on their answering machines. Unfortunately, it is not known what Tammy is said to have said in these messages. These messages are the last trace of Tammy Lynn Leppert. No one has seen her since. No one knows whether she set off on foot, got into a car, or if she really intended to go to Fort Lauderdale. There are only a few theories, and we're going to take a look at them together now. At first, the police assumed that Tammy was a typical runaway. The investigators didn't get involved until a week later because Tammy was 18 years old and therefore an adult. That may be why there are no reports of any further sightings of Tammy. There is, in fact, one piece of evidence that could suggest Tammy really did run away. Because 2 years later, in 1985, the police suddenly receive a tip. The phone rings at the Cocoa Beach police station. An unknown woman is on the line and claims that Tammy Lynn Leppert is still alive. She says she would contact the authorities when the time was right. The same unknown woman calls a second time afterward. This time, she says Tammy is doing well and is attending school to become a nurse. After this second call, the woman never contacted the police again. Nothing is known about the credibility of these calls. They are at least a glimmer of hope that Tammy was still doing well after July 6, 1983. The other theories are, unfortunately, much darker. The last person to see Tammy alive was her friend Keith. According to his own account, he dropped her off at the glass house. This is consistent with the fact that surveillance cameras recorded Tammy alone. Nevertheless, Keith naturally comes into focus as Tammy's last personal contact. Furthermore, Tammy's mother later told the media that her daughter had been afraid of Keith. However, Keith was never named as a suspect by the police, let alone charged with anything. He was summoned for a polygraph test, which he refused. He also declined to be interviewed without the test. Yet the police could find nothing to suggest that Keith had harmed Tammy. According to a friend of Tammy's at the time, Linda Curtis had many theories surrounding her daughter's disappearance and enjoyed sharing them. Soon, rumors began circulating in Florida that Tammy might have witnessed a satanic ritual or a blood sacrifice at the spring break party. These wild speculations likely originated mostly from Linda herself. In a 2020 podcast interview, Tammy's friend wondered whether these speculations might have been a way for Linda to distract attention from herself. Even back then, it didn't seem far-fetched to this friend that Tammy wanted to get away from home and her mother. There was also a rumor that Tammy had been pregnant at the time of her disappearance, about 3 months along. However, it is not known where this rumor came from or who the child's father was supposed to be. The friend who recounts this also admits, however, that he doesn't know exactly what was going on behind closed doors between Linda and Tammy back then. However, it is said that the relationship between Tammy and Linda had been strained after Linda had Tammy committed to a psychiatric clinic for 3 days. The 18-year-old apparently took that rather badly, but Linda considers it out of the question that Tammy simply ran away, since a 3-month trip to California had been planned to further her acting career. Linda also says that Tammy had been very much looking forward to this stay in California. That sounds more like a disappearance caused by someone else, especially since Tammy was very afraid that someone would harm her. However, there is no evidence that anyone from her personal or professional circle is responsible for Tammy's disappearance. Instead, leads were followed to two serial offenders. Christopher Wilder has gone down in criminal history as the beauty queen killer. In 1984, the year after Tammy disappeared, he murdered several young women. He also committed some of his crimes in Florida, where Tammy disappeared. He lured young women into his car under the pretense that he could get them modeling jobs. However, he was never questioned about the Tammy Lynn Leppert case, and it will no longer be possible to do so. Christopher Wilder was killed in a shootout with police in 1984. Afterward, her mother Linda sued Wilder's estate anyway, as she later admitted, though only to keep her daughter's missing person case in the media spotlight, not because of any reasonable suspicion. The police have never been able to establish a clear connection between Wilder and Tammy Lynn's disappearance, nor have they been able to link her to a serial offender named John Brennan Crutchley, known in the media as the Vampire Rapist. He moved to Florida the month before Tammy's disappearance, but there are no concrete clues to suggest that he kidnapped Tammy or harmed her. Or was Tammy simply in a state of mental distress at the time, which in 1983 could not yet be diagnosed as it can today? We will likely only find out if Tammy Lynn Leppert's remains are ever found, or if a potential perpetrator or an accomplice were to make a belated confession. Linda Curtis never found out what became of her daughter. She passed away in 1995, 12 years after Tammy's disappearance. Following a diabetes diagnosis, 2 heart attacks, business problems, and several broken relationships. Today, Tammy Lynn has one living relative left, her sister, Suzanne. To this day, she maintains a Facebook page, which she hopes will help in the search for her sister. At Suzanne's request, age progression images were also created, showing what Tammy might look like today. And these images likely wouldn't have been created if the authorities didn't believe in the possibility that Tammy is still alive. That's why I'd be interested to know. Can you imagine that Tammy really did run away? That maybe even the 2 anonymous calls to the police were real, and she actually became a nurse somewhere? I'm curious to hear your theories. By the way, you're also supporting the channel this way, because any interaction increases the likelihood that the video will be recommended to people who haven't subscribed to Insolito yet. Other than that, there isn't much else to say. I hope you're having a good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever time you're watching this. And I hope to see you again in the next video. Until then, ciao everyone.